Good afternoon and welcome to the first of our online mini-series, Get to Know PBN. My name is Hina Musabji and I am the Director of Development at Pro Bono Network. So with this series, it's our intention to introduce the work of PBN, the people involved, and let you know how you can be a part of this as well. Our mission is to transform lives by increasing access to legal representation. And the way we do this is by empowering attorneys to volunteer in civil legal aid. Because, you understand there just aren't enough attorneys for those in need, and income should not be a barrier to seeking justice. In our legal system, for criminal matters, you have a right to an attorney, but for civil matters, you don't. And civil legal needs often deal with basic human rights like safe housing, protection from an abuser, or the ability to get a job. And when you're living in poverty, having your basic rights taken care of legally helps put you on a pathway to thrive, right? And what Pro Bono Network does is bridge the gap by bringing more attorneys to those in need. We make it easier to volunteer and we empower attorneys to give back to others. Today, we are talking about racial equity and legal expungement. And our two panelists, or two people I'm having a discussion with actually today, more than a panel, are DeToya Burton-Cox, who is an attorney and PBN's Assistant Program Director, and she runs all of our racial equity programming. And we also have Lauren Bright, who's also an attorney and is PBN's Project Manager for our legal expungement work. So let's talk a little bit about our racial equity. So Pro Bono Network is committed to using our services to empower individuals who've been impacted by racial equity. And we understand that there's these huge gaps in legal aid service delivery, especially in underserved communities, the Black, Brown, and Latinx communities. And in 2020, we made it a priority to connect with community residents and community service providers to learn what they see as the most critical legal needs, and just as well as learning about their experiences with civil legal services, really learning from them and hearing their opinion on what they needed. And last year into this year, we started implementing services and collaborating with those local organizations. I mean, we know that we can't undo a history of racial oppression and discrimination, but what we can do is share the power in the exercise of legal education and access. And our expungement project that we're going to talk about today is one of the many components of this initiative. So I'm actually going to start with getting DeToya involved in this conversation. And let's talk about racial equity. Why in the legal forum, why is racial equity so important?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
We can, DeToya.
Again, my name is DeToya Burton-Cox, and I am working with Pro Bono Network, and part of my job is to assist with the diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects of our programming. So the question is, why is it important to have racial equity within the legal field, the legal profession, and legal services? So the first question that comes to mind is, what is racial equity, right? How do we get to that kumbaya word, if I could say? So racial equity basically is a diversity and equity and inclusion term, right? So what is diversity within the legal profession or in any profession within our community? So diversity is the presence of differences within a sector, okay? That means race and gender, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, so that all of these different categories are represented within a group, okay? That populations, these populations that have been marginalized and not heard actually have a seat at the table and an opportunity within a sector. So that's a big component of it. Then you go, what is equity, right? What is the racial equity? What's equity? And that's a big term and a big concept for simply saying equity is promoting justice and impartially, right? And fairness impartially within the procedures and the process and the distribution of resources within a sector. Okay. So it's like tackling, how can I say this? Tackling the root cause of the disenfranchisement of groups within a certain area. In this case, the legal field. Why aren't certain groups receiving the resources or not represented within the legal field? So that's what we're trying to identify, focus, and make sure that they have, again, that seat at the table, that opportunity. And then lastly, inclusion. And that's simply making sure that, again, people have that seat. People voices are heard, people concerns are heard, and within the legal field. So how does PBN or the legal field do that? As Hina said, we had our racial equity consultant go out and talk with these disenfranchised communities, right? Saying, why is it that people aren't utilizing legal services? What legal services aren't being offered to these communities? And how do we get these services and those communities to utilize the legal services? What can we do? Sorry, I talk with my hands. So
no, and I want to say, like, I really want to emphasize that you said, the importance of having a seat at the table.
Right.
And that, racial equity is justice, right? Those 2 points that you mentioned, I think just really emphasize some of the work that we're doing. And just to kind of expand on what you're saying, we had this consultant, PBN actually went in and asked the community, what do you need? Rather than saying, here's what we think you need.
Correct. Because that whole concept of us going in and saying, we think you need blase, and we want to give it to you, it's a slap in the face to the community, just so that you know. And it does not entice the community to come request services, because then the question that comes from the community, well, like, why are you telling me that this is what I need? What is it that you want from me? So it creates a lack of trust. And in the legal field, trust is a very important thing for disenfranchised communities, right? Because they've had so much lack of trust within that legal field, but they don't feel that it serves them. So yes, our with the help of our consultant, we went in and said, what services are necessary? Who needs these services? And how can we best provide these services? That's what we've been working towards thus far with PBN. So we've made our first partnership within PBN, specifically working with Expungement, the Westside Justice Center, which is a Westside organization that deals with a multitude of issues. And one of their big issues is expungement. Why did we start there? Because expungement has an effect in so many other realms, and Lauren will go back and we'll hit on those different issues later, but it touches so many different things, and it affects people's ability to maneuver in different areas within their lives, within their livelihoods and things of that sort. So we're working with Westside Justice Center on doing that. And it's a Westside organization, which means we hit people that have not received these legal services before or don't get enough of those legal services.
Yeah, and it sounds like collaborating with a local known entity is important for the community too, rather than PBN going in as an unknown and saying, here we are.
Oh, but of course, because that organization has already been doing things. So they have a client base that says, we trust you. Mm-hmm. And PBN is like riding the bootstraps of Westside Justice Center. And we're getting the altruism and the camaraderie from the public because they trust Westside Justice. So they're like, we know you wouldn't bring bad people to us. So
it's like a warm introduction to the community.
It's so nice, we're all friends in this, right? Yeah. So that's how it works.
Yeah, and so I know the racial equity program has a lot of facets. We have a lot happening under it, but today I really want us to talk about our legal expungement work. So Lauren Bright, let me bring you into the conversation here. You know, from the general understanding of expungement, the way the world knows it is, you know, that the assumption is that, people have kind of paid their debt to society and then they're looking for ways to better their lives. But I think really understanding what expungement is, and it's more than what I just said in that brief introduction. And I know I almost teetered people off into that misunderstanding that people often have. So tell me, explain expungement. What is expungement? And then we'll talk about how PBN is helping in that realm.
Thanks, Hina. Yes, expungement. When we're talking about expungement, we're talking about managing criminal records. We're not talking about civil cases. We're talking about a criminal record, such as theft, loitering, drug cases. And really at the point of arrest, there's a paper trail that follows. You're creating a criminal record. So what we're talking about with expungement is first figuring out what's on your record. A lot of clients that come to us don't even know what's on there. And you may not be surprised to know there's multiple agencies and organizations that maintain a criminal record, and they don't always match up, and we need to cross-check. So Chicago Police Department maintains the system. Illinois police also have a criminal record, as well as the court system. So first thing we're going to do is pull that record, including the Chicago Police Department's rap sheet, see what's on it, review it with the client. Many times the client is even surprised that something's on there. A common misperception is that just a conviction will be on your record. In fact, it's just an arrest. Even if you are detained, arrested, and then released without being formally charged, that can appear on your record. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out what's on it. Then we're going to look at the legal research part, which is what is eligible for expungement. And just briefly, what's expungement? That's legal relief that you get through the court. Expungement is destroying a record, I guess is a simple way to say it. It's as if it never happened. It comes out of all these systems that I've just talked about. Very, very few people would have access to it. Sealing is another form of relief. Sealing is a little bit more limited, but still very beneficial for our clients. Sealing is as if you picture sealing it in an envelope so that the very few people, the public can no longer see that record. I could not see that record. The police could, and some very limited employers, mostly for a public safety policy reason. For example, if you're applying to be employed by Chicago Public Schools, like education, transportation, the CTA, certain employers have a higher level of access than others. But that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So Lauren, you said something really interesting that sometimes when you look at, pull the rap sheets for the clients and stuff, they don't even know something was on there because it wasn't your typical type of process through the system. And if you have these on your record, they're showing up, right? When I go to apply for a job or I'm applying for housing to rent an apartment, these things show up, even though I don't know they exist.
They absolutely do. In fact, the first time we often hear from a client is because they have been denied either a job or been denied Section 8 housing, or something else has happened where they've reached out to one of our legal aid organizations in the community that we partner with and said, hey, this created a big problem for me. Or they know from talking to other people, I want to apply to FedEx. I'm concerned because I think there's something in my record. Can you help me sort that out? Absolutely. It's a huge barrier. And as we also know from research and from talking to our West Side and South Side neighbors, Black and Brown communities are disproportionately impacted by criminal records. They have a disproportionate number of police interactions, many of those resulting in arrests or criminal action that shows up in these criminal records that causes serious problems, even if they're never convicted. So the work we do is really, really significant.
Yeah. So what are the pro bono network attorneys doing? How are they helping in this?
So we're helping by first doing the research, pulling working with the client to figure out what's in a record, having phone calls with clients to say what we're finding. Often clients will say, gosh, I thought that was I thought I pled to something different. Unfortunately, that's a really common thing we hear. When I was at court, I thought I pled to a misdemeanor. I didn't realize there's a felony on there. That's a really kind of tragic circumstance where clients aren't even understanding what's happening to them. But once we've determined what's eligible for sealing or expungement, and there are some limited things that are not entitled to relief, just throwing it out there, DUI is an example of something that can never be given relief. But we draft petitions, and I think it's important for clients or for even the public, anyone, to understand that this is not automatic, this relief. I think people think if I'm found not guilty, will it just come off my record? Unfortunately, no. Clients need to initiate that. We need to educate the community on this is action we need to take, and PBN and other legal aid organizations are here to help, but it needs to be initiated. It's a long process. PBN will help file the paperwork that the client reviews. We file it with the court. Unfortunately, the courts are seriously backlogged. This can take over a year to process, and that's why we need to start now. So as you can imagine, they can't get the job they want until this is worked through the court system. They've been granted relief.
Okay, and so attorneys who want to get involved at Pro Bono Network, I encourage you to go on to our website, www.pro-bono-network.org. We'll get you in touch with Lauren and DeToya and get you started on this project if you want. The time commitment for this project, ladies, as a volunteer, I am one of our new volunteers on this project.
Thank you.
So tell me, what does the time commitment look like for an attorney who wants to get involved as we wrap this up?
DeToya, you want to address it, or I could quickly? It typically takes a couple weeks to research a rap sheet and summarize the charges and review that with the client. And then it takes typically maybe only another week to draft the petitions. The petitions are not overly complicated, and there are state forms that are templates that we use. But there are 2 steps to the process, both the research and then the drafting. But this is not a long-term commitment. This is once you've drafted the paperwork, we hand it off to be filed with the court.
And the result being that people can, re-enter society in a meaningful way. They can work, get jobs, get housing, remove all these barriers. If you're not an attorney, I encourage you to kind of follow us on social media. We are on all the platforms. You'll find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Insta. Share any of our stories that resonate with you. And we also, we're happy to also take your support in form of donations. So thank you so much for joining us for our first session on getting to know PBN. And thank you so much to both DeToya and Lauren for sharing your wisdom with us today.
You're welcome, everyone.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.